Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Katsuhiro Ôtomo's Akira in 1988. Here it is on Blu-ray, and yes, I actually had to just pick this up the other day because I really wanted to see this desperately very, very soon. And yes, very, very acclaimed film, and of course, I've seen quite a few animes now, anime films. I'm definitely obsessed. I love all of the ones that I've seen, and yes, it's only my 11th this film, to watch all the way through. Which some may say that's a decent amount, but I would say compared to how many there is, I can't say that I'm an experienced in that sense anime watcher, by the numbers. But I have rewatched a couple of the other ones as well, and I am obsessed. I think some of the very best films ever made are anime films, especially of course Miyazaki's work, and yes. This film, at times is called the greatest anime film of all time, and just, it's usually the top 5 definitely on rankings. Although critically, I think Rotten Tomatoes is 88, and it's just not as high as quite a few of them, of course. And yes, IMDb, Letterboxd even, it's not one of the very highest, most loved on them sites, but rankings and general sort of anime lovers would say this is definitely, right up in the top, if not the best. So I had massive expectations, and actually, I really didn't know anything about this film, and of course, I kind of read the back before I watched it, of course, and it just really intrigued me. Neo Tokyo, so 2019, which is quite amazing. It's meant to be set, and then after all, it's massive bomb after World War III, basically. So it's really, really interesting. And yes, basically, after everything's getting rebuilt, it's kind of like the city looks very much like Blade Runner. If you've seen that film, it's very much like that. Although I don't, think too much of that film, Blade Runner. I do think the city visually, is portrayed wonderfully. It's really just great world building in that sense. And this one, it just really does remind me of that, and actually the whole kind of intro, the prologue was absolutely stunning. It had me hooked from the beginning. It really did, and just an atmosphere, the kind of use of silence, and just general the animation throughout this film is absolutely stunning. It's wonderful. It really is, and of course the action scenes. We'll get to that. Really amazing. But yes, this film. Of course, the ideas just sounded amazing, and of course it really fueled my imagination at first. And of course you've got these Kaneda and Tesshô, the main two characters. They're kind of high school dropouts, you could say, kind of in this biker gang, and of course they've got these futuristic bikes, not just normal bikes. And yes, of course, this film, it deals early on as well with government kind of protests, government control, and stuff, and just general corruption. It really, explores many themes in this, of course. And yes, I think you see these guys going around and stuff, and of course, it is just amazing. These kind of chase scenes at the beginning, I was absolutely in awe of this. I was completely invested as well in the subtle kind of back and forth and stuff. The kind of the character building. The relationships. You learn very early on that they're quite long life friends, basically, kind of thing, and yes, this kind of Tetsu is kind of wants to kind of be more prominent within the group and stuff, and he's always getting rescued apparently by Kaneda, so he's not jealous, but kind of like that, and yeah, it's just really, it was so compelling, and of course the action there was absolutely stunning. The action pretty much throughout this film is perfect. It really is. It's so creative. It's so just thrilling and visually just wowing. But yes, I think this film is great. And I do of course love anime. As I said, I've loved all the other anime films that I've seen. So it's not like I'm not an anime lover. I am obsessed. This film I think is great, but actually, and this is just my opinion, we're all allowed them, I don't think this is comparable really to any of the Miyazakis I've seen. Well, in fact, I'll say that this is probably the worst anime film that I've seen of the 11 films. Maybe a slight spoilers to some of the other reviews that I'll do, but it doesn't matter. I think this it's a great film, but it's not a masterpiece for me. I think definitely I have some problems with it, and just it falls slightly short. You know, the flaws throughout the film are not massive; they are very slight. But there's quite a few of them I have really. So it does bring the score down. It's definitely not a masterpiece for me. And of course, yes, you have an ambiguous ending, really. But I think you know, some of the final act, in terms of some things, were a bit disappointing. And also, actually, yeah, we'll get to some other stuff. But yes, the opening 30 minutes, I literally had no flaws with. Really, I thought it was probably, you know, just one of the. It would definitely be in, you know, kind of top 250 on my favorite films list. You know, it's not. It won't be, you know, on that now, but it might get like a kind of a placement right near the end of my kind of 500 favorite films list that I'm making. And yes, you know, I think it was just so thrilling. It balanced out, you know, character with atmosphere, you know, world building and action. You know, just kind of humor as well. Unfortunately, the humor was lacking throughout the rest of the film. You know, and it does take a dark turn. It's kind of depressing a little bit. But yeah, I think the humour definitely lacked throughout the rest of the film. But yes, you know, Tetsu is captured very early on, and I was just loving how, you know, at first he was captured and you see this kind of this weird stuff going on. And it's very mysterious, and of course, Akira. We don't really know exactly what Akira is. And of course, that's hinted. It's kind of brought in there early on, and we're like, that's very interesting. You know, I can't wait to find out more about that. And of course, Tetsu is getting tested on by the government. Of course, a massive theme in this film. And yes, basically, he develops kind of powers over the course of the first hour, and then, you know, in the second half, he's, you know, unstoppable, which is, yes, it's very, very epic, but again, slightly one-sided, and it does taint the kind of the enjoyable, the compelling nature of the kind of relationships in the film. But yes, you know, early on, I think it was just so invested, as I said, you know, and just the minor characters as well, you know, the whole group, this kind of friendship between all of them, the kind of camaraderie, you know, with the gang, and just these other people, you know, from in and around the school and stuff that they're in, just really amazing, so compelling and very charming, and you know, it's not really like that for the rest of the film. After the first 30 minutes, really, or so, it starts to take a slight turn. Really gone is the compelling nature of these relationships as much. Yes, you've got kind of romances going on, if you will, but they're not really that well fleshed out, you know, which is fine. It's not, you know, it's just a 2-hour film, and of course they had so many other things going on, which maybe is a bit of a flaw, you know. Maybe at times it's slightly a bit you know, muddled. I will definitely say it's convoluted, you know, the whole situation with Akira, what that is, because I know, of course, what it is, you know, kind of thing, but it took a lot of kind of muddling around to kind of get to what exactly it was, and it was a bit convoluted, definitely, you know, but, and, you know, I think it does take a little bit of a turn. The first 30 minutes is, as I say, pretty much perfect. I was invested in the world, the characters, and everything, you know. Then, you know, you start going into these kind of labs, which, yeah, I would compare for the rest of the film. It's not as, you know, visually compelling at all. It's kind of slightly flat, you know, in that sense. But again, the characters, the kind of the story of this, I was completely invested in that sense. You know, to a certain point near the end. Yeah, but basically, you know, I think, you know, it was so visually stunning at first and afterwards as well. But these lab scenes for about 10 minutes or so are a bit flat visually, and there's not that much going on really. But the story I was invested, I was seeing where this kind of, you know, this is a masterful, mostly portrayal, you know, of this Tetsu character, and actually a tragedy and stuff, and how, of course, government corruption and stuff comes into that. But really, it is a tragedy, you know, and overcome with power, really, throughout the rest of the film. And this narrative, you know, his arc, Tetsu, is actually great. You know, it is masterful. It really is something else. That's what really had me, you know, kind of like, wow, you know, that is stunning. And of course, wanting to see where it would go, you know, and stuff with of course, the other characters, Canada. You know, I think I really wanted to see what would happen. You know, the interaction, and of course, even for the first hour, that was in place. You know, wonderfully. Of course, there's the other kind of psychic kids in the film. I don't really know how to describe them. They come into it, and I think another slight flaw. I was a bit disappointed with that. I think maybe they weren't as good as they could have been. Slightly wasted potential there. They weren't that interesting, really. Yes, they kind of maybe they were a bit kind of plot devices for me. Just not that enjoyable to watch them. They were a bit flat, a bit compared to what they could have been, and just a slightly wasted potential there. There wasn't really much charm, surprisingly, in that. And I know this is meant to be a dark kind of, messed up kind of film, stuff. But of course, this is very violent as well for an animated film. I don't really, because I've not really seen much violent animated films in general. So this is it's really interesting to see. But I think there's not really much charm in these characters, especially compared to Miyazaki. And it's not just comparing; it is just on its own. I think they could have been better. But yes, as well, you've got the kind of villains in the film. Generally, the government is, and you could say they're a bit generic. I don't really think that taints the film too much at all. That maybe isn't really much of a flaw. There's loads of films where that doesn't really hurt it. But you've got this. Yeah, you've got the second act comes into the second half comes into play, and then you've got loads more action, which mostly is masterful. It really is. This is some of the best action I've seen. Really at times ever. It really is just amazing action. It's so thrilling, so visually just wowing, and it's just got so many layers to the action and stuff. And yeah, mostly you have got so many great character moments within them. I think the score that I'll give this is very, very high. It's just not, I think compared to what I thought it'd be, maybe I sound a bit disappointed. It has got flaws, and I don't think it's the best anime film. It's certainly not comparable to Miyazaki's best. That's for sure for me. But yes, I think the second half of the film kind of. There is moments where it is a bit too much explosions, within the context of the film kind of thing. And actually, it did lose me a little bit. The overall kind of connection to the characters and the world, really. I think I was so invested, just compared to how, the first 30 minutes, really. I was so invested in this film. The world, the whole kind of plot, and what Akira is, the whole exposition was masterfully built up. It really, what they done there, it was just wonderful. Of course, the writing was just really, really great, and the overall kind of portrayal of the government and stuff. It said so many, many strong messages there, and it's just so investing, so engaging. I love the humour in the film as well, and then I compare that to some of the second half of the film. And I have to admit, looking back, I watched it last night, and I wanted to kind of sit on it and see what I really thought, my exact rating. I think it's slightly, compared to that, I was slightly less invested in the overall, the world, and just the kind of, the whole thing with Akira. I think it was a bit disappointing what it actually was, and what happened there, or who it was, I'm not going to say, and stuff. It's a bit of both, really. But yeah, just some of that was slightly disappointing. The whole resolution of the film, while again the characters pick up then in the last 20 minutes of the film or so, where it's really, really it's trying to be very emotional, and actually it was for a lot of the time, and very spiritual moments. But yes, I think it did have some flaws there, definitely, and I didn't think it came together perfectly. And yes, I think there's a bit too much explosions. There's a lot of shouting in the film, which is fine, but the explosions maybe not quite as frequent in the context of this film. I think it could have been a bit less. There's a lot of explosions in the second half of the film, really. And yes, basically, Canada. I think his relationship with Tetsu, over the film, could have been a bit more consistent, in how compelling it was. But again, it is a tragedy. It really, in many senses, is a masterpiece of a tragedy. It's just my connection with some of the film in different moments, certainly, 10 minutes here and there, it just wasn't quite there as much as it could have been. And yes, I think overall mildly disappointing, although I definitely think it's a great film. There's no denying that for me. I understand, if people don't like this one. For me, it's not, Miyazaki or Takahata, where they're just so, kind of relatable in the human sense. And I do think fantasy works a lot better than sci-fi for animated films in general, really. And I think, comparing it to Miyazaki's world building as well, there's no comparison for me. I think, even of course, yeah, I've got it here. Totoro, which I watched, of course, rewatched the other day, reviewed that. Yeah, I think the world building even on that, and it's not really that much fantasy in that film. You know, it's kind of very, very rooted in a normal rural Japan post-war. You know, it really isn't kind of anything kind of too out there. You know, in the kind of the overall world, but you know, it has got quite a lot of fantasy coming into play with Totoro later on in the film. I think the way that's kind of built up and the way it's consistent is much better than this. I think this started out as pretty much perfect, and then it went downhill a little bit. It's definitely still a great film, despite my flaws. You know, I think it definitely is overall a really just an interesting world. I think a unique vision. I think the reason it gets, you know, compared to what I'm describing it, I'm still describing it as a great film, but you know, kind of gets a bit of a higher score than what I am describing, maybe like around a 9 out of 10. I think it's a bit higher than that. I think because just how much, you know, kind of a poetic tragedy this was, and actually the action and everything was just astounding really throughout, minus a couple of explosions here and there, a bit too much. But I think, yes, I think maybe because it started out so invested in, you know, and it kind of went downhill a little bit, that I was a bit disappointed. And of course, yeah, compared to you know, it's made out to be, and which is fine, you know, to be like the best anime film ever or the best animated film, you know, kind of top 5. Not for me, definitely not. This isn't really in the top 25 animated films for me of all time, you know, let alone the top 5. But yeah, I think it's a great film. I definitely overall I did love the film, you could say, but I think there was flaws throughout the film, not major flaws. You know, there's things that just don't quite reach their potential. There is some flaws here and there, definitely in different aspects of the film. I think the second half of the film has got moments where it's more invested in some of the first half, you know, but again, it never really peaked to my overall investment and connection consistently to the first half an hour or a bit more than that. So, yeah, I think I'd have to give it, you know, a 94%. I think that is a massively high score for me. You know, I think I'm a bit disappointed with just how it turned out with some things in the narrative. Overall, I think, yeah, a bit inconsistent. I think the storytelling, you know, at times was a bit flat. You know, I think visually as well, the labs kind of scenes were not that great for me. And yeah, I think the overall kind of enjoyment and the connection with the relationships in the second half of the film, until the last 20 minutes, is kind of tainted a little bit. It's not really there too much, and it, as I say, a little bit convoluted. Really, I think the overall kind of plot. What is Akira? I'm not going to say, but you know, it does become clear, you know, at the very end. But I think along the way, you know, yeah, it's got an ambiguous ending, but Akira is kind of wrapped up what it is and stuff. But I think, you know, to get there, it does have a bit of muddling, a bit of you know, clarity problems there, and it just is a bit too convoluted for what it kind of is. You know, I think it didn't need to be that much. But yes, I think it's got so many themes packed into this. It's got so many messages. It slightly gets muddled at times, and of course, as I say, overall the narrative not perfect for me. I think the characters and stuff, again, you know, they are great overall, mostly, but I think compared to the other anime films I've seen, really they're maybe only better than one of the anime films I've seen and stuff. And was I as, you know, emotionally impacted as any of the other anime films I've seen? You know, Grave of the Fireflies, you know, all these ones, even Totoro, definitely not. You know, I think there was moments where it was very moving and sad, but I think overall did not compare to them. I think, you know, I'm definitely going to be rewatching this in the next few days, so look forward to that. You know, this is what when you talk about, you know, sad and kind of moving anime films, you know, this is one of the very most at the top. You know, it's not comparable to something like Grave of the Fireflies. And again, you know, I think, yes, it's more of an action-based kind of, definitely a sci-fi film. But again, I think there's just moments where the characters and stuff and the narrative is a bit, it's not quite as compelling as it could have been, and just certain 10 minutes or so at a time where it just falls a bit short of what it could have been and stuff. And I was overall a bit disappointed with some of the story, the narrative, the investment really at times. Bit too much explosions. I've heard some criticisms, quite funny, about the kind of the shouting constant between Tetsu and Canada. I think I don't really hold that view. You know, there's too much shouting. You know, I think, but it's kind of funny to see. That wasn't really my flaw. The explosions, though, yeah, I think maybe tone them down a little bit. That's what one of my flaws was. I've said my flaws, and I think there's definitely flaws littered throughout. They're not major flaws. You know, that's why it's such a high score still. You know, and of course, as a you know a vision, you know, this is really something else. You know, overall. The world building at first is absolutely immaculate. It's one of the best, you know, world buildings in an animated film. You know, I think it's just so investing, and actually just the soundtrack to this is it's amazing. Epic soundtrack and so atmospheric and stuff. Forgot to mention that, and that is amazing. But yeah, you know, overall it doesn't compare to the first 35 minutes of the rest of the film, but it has got definitely masterful moments. It's a tragedy overall. It's poetic. It's got, you know, kind of moments where the action is just mind blowing. It really is. And of course, the visuals throughout mostly are amazing. You know, they are perfect, really, apart from the lab scenes and stuff. But yes, this is very creative stuff. So creative visually and stuff. And I have to give it a 94. But again, I was a bit disappointed with some of how it turned out, and just my over-investment consistently throughout the film wasn't quite there, you know, in terms of what it could have been. And that's Akira. I think it's a great film, but I don't think it's a masterpiece. Personally, I do think it's the worst anime film that I've seen of the now 11. So yes, but it is a great film, and of course I'd highly recommend it. So yes, tell me your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching my review.